The 10 Shadows and Limitless curse techniques are two of the strongest curse techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen. Today we're going to be breaking down which of these two is the stronger or superior technique. This video will be segmented into a couple different rounds as there is a lot of context and variables when discussing these two high-level curse techniques, but we can skip the chit-chat and get right into the video. For the first round, we have a non-suicidal 10 Shadows user, so Mahoraga is restricted for this round. It won't matter, versus the base Limitless technique. In regards to the Limitless technique, you kind of have to hit the genetic lottery twice to really maximize on its abilities. It's noted that the Limitless is extremely difficult to use. Even if other characters did have the Limitless curse technique or were able to wield it, the Jujutsu requires a sophisticated manipulation of cursed energy. Even if there are other sorcerers with the possibility of using the Limitless curse technique, Satoru Gojo is the only one who can use it because he possesses the 6 eyes. Many characters in the series make note of how the Limitless Jujutsu itself is only possible due to the 6 eyes, meaning that all the derivatives of the curse technique, that being Infinity, curse technique Lapse or Blue, curse technique Reversal or Red, even his teleportation where the space between his location and destination is compressed, these are all applications of the Limitless Jujutsu, which is only possible via the 6 eyes. What this means is that if you do not possess the 6 eyes, you're really not going to be able to utilize all these techniques, as you simply wouldn't have the curse manipulation required. It's also no accident that Kenjaku lost twice in the past to sorcerers of the 6 eyes and not the Limitless curse technique on its own. It just isn't threatening remotely or even possible to use without these special eyes. Compare this to the 10 Shadows technique, which doesn't require any secondary genetic lottery pool to utilize. Even using Megami as a baseline, we know he's capable of quite a bit by just using the 10 Shadows normally, the technique beginning when a sorcerer receives 2 Divine Dogs, and in order to utilize or use other Shikigami, the sorcerer and Divine Dogs must work together to exercise them. Then the sorcerer gains more Shikigami, which they can then utilize to exercise and amass up to 10 Shikigami. Megami was able to amass quite a few Shikigami through this process, as we see even from the beginning of the series, with the 10 Shadows technique even offering the possibility of domain expansion inherent to the technique, as we see with Megami and his Chimera Shadow Garden, even in the incomplete variation that Megami uses where he needs to utilize buildings or existing barriers to enclose his domain. This is still a step above just having no curse technique. Megami's specific variation of the domain expansion serving as an extension of the 10 Shadows technique, improving his potential capacity by 120%, the possibility of it becoming a complete domain with a sure hit effect in the future existing. Without getting into points that'll be brought up later in the video, it should be pretty clear 10 Shadows takes this with absolutely zero difficulty, so we're just going to shimmy on over to the next round. Moving on to the second round, we have 10 Shadows against the Limitless and the 6 eyes. You might say the 10 Shadows just wins as a byproduct of having to give the Limitless technique its other counterpart, that being the 6 eyes. I think that's fair, but doesn't really make for a great video. The 6 eyes, like we established, allow the user in question to have far more precise cursed energy manipulation, allowing the user to see the flow of cursed energy in extreme detail and the ability to use that flow to read cursed techniques. This extreme manipulation of cursed energy going down to the atomic level, hence why these eyes are required. This isn't just limited to the user's techniques, but the user themselves, as Yuta, somebody who's noted to have more cursed energy than Gojo, notes how due to Gojo having these 6 eyes, the energy that's lost when he activates a cursed technique is infinitesimally close to zero. So despite Yuta actually having more cursed energy, Gojo is the best as he just doesn't run out of energy. But you do want to be careful about using Gojo solely as the standard. We see Yuta and Gojo's body ponder what it did take for Gojo to say he's the strongest after finding Infinity so difficult to use, which did in fact answer the question that Gojo was the strongest because he was Satoru Gojo, not the other way around. I think this answer can shift depending on if the characters in question have access to the reverse curse technique, as this changes what exactly they'll be able to perform with their respective techniques. In the 10 Shadows case, we actually know that characters don't need to have access to the reverse curse technique and can kind of supplement it, specifically with the round deer. The specific Shikigami outputs positive energy just like the reverse curse technique, enabling it to heal the user in a completely separate manner from the user's own reverse curse technique, as we see it heal Sukuna in his fight with Yorozu, or in the Gojo vs Sukuna fight. It's noted that Agito has adopted the powers of round deer and due to this fact, Gojo needs to prioritize destroying it, meaning its variation of RCT does lie separately from the user, even if it is a construct of their own cursed energy. The reason I bring up RCT is due to how the Limitless and 6 Eyes with no RCT is very strong, as Gojo is showcased having remarkable feats with blue or having access to the infinity barrier. Granted, it just can't be maintained perpetually at risk of frying the user's brain, but without the ability to multiply cursed energy on itself to create positive energy, it holds back some abilities that users are able to perform, such as the cursed technique reversal or red, which Gojo was only able to perform after he learned how to perform the RCT. It goes without saying this also goes for hollow technique purple, which collides the lapse and reversal of infinity, merging convergence and divergence. It also doesn't help that reverse curse technique is notoriously rare even among the big three families, meaning unless you're a calamity grade Satoru Gojo, you're most likely not going to be able to have the reverse curse technique or awakening on death's door. So there is a bit of a wall between the rest of the abilities. 10 Shadows as well has always been an ability that, compared to Infinity, which is this unbreachable defensive barrier, more so excels in its versatility and adaptability, so to speak, offering a lot more variety and potential, not only how it innately functions, but with the Shikigami getting destroyed or having the ability to merge via totality. This making it so there's a nigh infinite amount of Shikigami that can be created through this method, the only two in the series being Divine Dog Totality, which is strong enough to one-shot off-guard special grade finger bears or damage an on-guard Hanami, the other being a new Totality Merged Beast Agito, who is obviously the collective of 3 Shikigami, that being Great Serpent, Tiger Funeral, and Round Deer, and enough of a combatant to where Sukuna feels like they could be recognized as one alongside him and Mahoraga in his infamous 3v1 line, having insanely strong regeneration feats, actually being able to regenerate a Black Flash from Gojo himself. This also going double for escape maneuvers such as Rabbit Escape or hiding in shadows of the Shikigami, which can be considered in some respects equivalent to Gojo's teleportation in their ability to avoid danger, either over long distances or escaping potential domains. You have the potential for a near limitless combination against just blue and a manual infinity barrier, but this can be circumvented in the sheer difficulty of getting around infinity in the first place, or the sheer stamina saving effect of the 6 Eyes, which would make it so your use of curse energy is lowered far more than somebody just utilizing the 10 shadows normally, which I don't want to touch on too much for this specific category, as when you start getting into that, there's all these subsections. I'm going to talk about that in the last category of this video, so stick around and we'll touch on that more so. But assuming that this is the full 6 Eyes in Limitless with reverse curse technique, there is a higher end for what the user would be able to obtain compared to the 10 shadows technique with Mahoraga restricted. Even assuming the user in question wouldn't be able to replicate everything Satoru Gojo did, you would still just have a higher end of what the user should be able to achieve than what a Mahoraga restricted 10 shadows user would really be able to. As far as potential domains, this is kind of an unfortunate situation, as we just have a ton of knowledge on Unlimited Void, the domain where Gojo brings the target into the inner world of Limitless and essentially floods their brain with information, stun locking them. The only real metric we have is an incomplete domain in Chimera Shadow Garden versus Unlimited Void, which isn't really much of a matchup and may not be fair to say, but it's all we really have. Assuming reverse curse technique is in play, I actually do lean into the 6 Eyes in Limitless due to how the abilities are fundamentally a lot stronger, whereas 10 shadows more have the potential and variability, but are a lot harder to use in this type of discussion. This also isn't coming out of nowhere, as the next category does lean into why I have 6 Eyes and Limitless over a Mahoraga restricted 10 shadows technique. The video thus far has more so been in reference to 10 shadows users who value their lives, as when you get into characters who don't value their lives, they undergo a certain ritual to summon, yes, you might have guessed it, the Demon King of Blue Lock Isagi Yoichi. It's the Divine General Mahoraga, the most powerful Shikigami of the 10 Shadows technique. Nobody's really given access to this, or I'm not really giving it to a lot of the 10 Shadow categories, since it's just stated that throughout its history, no user of the curse technique has ever been able to tame it, with the sole exception of Sukuna, so it's kind of its own separate category. When you factor in a suicidal 10 Shadows user versus the Limitless and 6 Eyes, we know from Megami's conversation with Gojo that either during the Keicho or Edo period, the head of the respective households killed each other in a fight before the aristocracy, the two heads being a Limitless curse technique user with the 6 Eyes and a 10 shadows curse technique user. Megami surmised that the head of the Zenin household used a summoning ritual featuring himself and the opposing Gojo clan head to summon Mahoraga as a last resort. This being a last resort due to how it's possible to exercise a Shikigami with multiple people, but doing so nullifies the technique's effect after the exorcism is done. So even if we were to exercise Mahoraga, the 10 shadows user wouldn't gain access to into the shadow. A pointless exorcism, so to speak, although the exact specifics of this encounter are overall left up in the air, aside from both parties ending up dead of course, means that this should just be a stalemate in reference to these two curse techniques. We don't have any metric for either of these clan heads. However, the story does use this as a tool to say Megami's curse technique just has as much potential as Gojo's, which Gojo uses as a point to say Megami could become as strong as him, something Megami just doesn't agree with. It is presented, at least narratively, that the two techniques are generally relative or in a comparable range from a potential standpoint, at the very least when an untamed Mahoraga is thrown into the conversation. For the last category, we have a fully realized 10 shadows with tamed Mahoraga versus a fully realized 6 eyes plus Limitless. I think there's a lot we could derive from the Gojo Sukuna fight that really helps with this answer, as the two are generally considered equals by the verse itself or just very close in strength. This obviously extending over to their manipulation of their respective curse techniques and applications of said techniques. A good feat that outlines the two, at least in my opinion, why I think the two are a good metric to use, is Sukuna being able to use Max Elephant to create a piercing blood attack, Gojo remarking he's as handy as he is, the feat being in regards to overall skill, which is consistent across translations, which means we can use these two as a control group where the two individuals in question are not equal in terms of skill. Sukuna is the closest thing we have to a fully realized 10 Shadows user, as despite him not showing us everything the 10 Shadows has to offer in his fight with Gojo, prioritizing Mahoraga's adaptation over techniques that likely wouldn't have been effective on Gojo outside the domain clash, I do think Sukuna's fight with Yorozu gives us more fight to what this would be like if he was strictly utilizing these techniques. Sukuna is showcased working around the limitations of the 10 Shadows technique, as when Shikigami are destroyed, they don't come back. Rather, their power gets added on to the next Shikigami in line. Sukuna's workaround for this problem was to keep the form of the Shikigami partially unstable. This allows for a larger effective attack range while still keeping them from falling apart altogether. The trade-off here being that the Shikigami could no longer move independently and their overall attack power was lowered considerably as a result. Sukuna was able to make these drawbacks inconsequential, but this is more of a byproduct of his immense cursed reserves and output, meaning it isn't something that every 10 Shadows user who utilized the technique in a similar manner would likely be able to do. Adversely, Gojo isn't a slouch in maximizing his cursed technique's effectiveness, as even with his pure physical might, on top of enhancing his fist with cursed energy, on the moment of impact, Blue repeatedly absorbs the surrounding space, making it feel like you've been clocked by a counterattack after preparing for a regular blow. Nanami even making note of how even though he puts a great deal of effort towards his critical hits, Gojo is able to perform them as if they're his run-of-the-mill jabs. If we use Gojo and Sukuna as the standard in this discussion, there's a couple different points we can derive. The 6 eyes is cursed energy efficiency, being able to tip the point in Gojo's favor, at least in terms of cursed energy efficiency against Sukuna, who was noted to likely be winning in this regard if it wasn't for the 6 eyes. Keep in mind that Sukuna's cursed energy efficiency is extremely high, with his overall cursed energy being more than double that of Yuta's, who already has more cursed energy than Gojo to begin with. Or if you were going to talk about certain aspects of this discussion, such as curse techniques against curses, then the 10 Shadows fundamentally are more suited, as Mahoraga's primary weapon is the Sword of Extermination, a blade attached to its forearm that's enveloped in positive energy, making it especially effective against cursed spirits. Sukuna noting he would have been taken out by Mahoraga's first strike back in Shibuya if he actually were a cursed spirit, meaning there's different parts of these characters' arsenals that do favor in different areas, especially if you want to get into the subcategories between them. Even more so if you wanted to bring Tamed Mahoraga into a domain expansion and have Chimera Shadow Garden mixed with Mahoraga. It's assuming that the domain expansion would actually incorporate the Shikigami into its sure hit effect. If you don't think that, then you can throw this point out. The 10 Shadows would still have a more beneficial matchup against cursed spirits. Even though during this fight Sukuna didn't show us everything with the 10 Shadows technique, I do think it would make more sense that if we were going to take these two users of comparable skill and these two curse techniques at their absolute highest potential, then the 6 eyes and Limitless technique would be greater, as it took a 10 Shadows user of roughly equal skill to Gojo, plus the shrine and developing the world cutting slash to take down Gojo, essentially combining two parts of his arsenal in order to develop a technique to defeat Gojo. This technique only coming about after 2 rounds of Mahoraga's adaptation to the Limitless technique, that being Infinity. The second adaptation sending slashes like Sukuna does, which enabled him to piggyback off of that and expand his target's range. A lot of people don't bring this up, but Sukuna was actually very fortunate that Mahoraga's adaptation was something that he could actually piggyback on when it accelerated, that being sending slashes flying, as if it was a different adaptation or it wasn't the exact adaptation that he could piggyback off of to create his world cutting slash, then he wouldn't have had that option later in the fight in which he would have just lost. Not to get too much into the Gojo vs Sukuna fight itself, as there's a lot of pros and cons to the way that Sukuna fought, more so bringing up how Sukuna still had to pull from outside the 10 Shadows technique and couldn't solely rely on it in order to defeat Gojo. That being through either his domain expansion or the rest of his fight, where he's actively using domain amplification to actually hit Gojo through infinity. Due to how cursed spirits are the only ones who showcase domain amplification, it creates situations where it's that much harder for these 10 Shadow users to get through infinity, leaving their main option to be through either domain clashes or through Mahoraga's adaptation. The point being that, again, Sukuna, despite being of comparable skill to Gojo, is actively pulling out from different parts of his arsenal in order to beat Gojo, who is using strictly the Limitless technique and maximizing it to the utmost degree. It's being showcased most explicitly in the finale of the fight, where he uses his ace technique aside from domain expansion, that being purple, getting the technique off in an extremely roundabout way with no blast radius. So while there is a big part of this discussion where there is a lot more the 10 Shadows can show us, I feel as if Sukuna is a pretty decent representation of what a full potential 10 Shadows user is, despite the fact that he doesn't use everything in the 10 Shadows arsenal, it more so being the case that with strictly the 10 Shadows arsenal alone, he wouldn't have been able to be a Gojo operating off the 6 Eyes and Limitless by itself. That's the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I sure did. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Want to see more of this type of content. Stick around. You know, maybe I'll do another JJK video. Maybe. I don't know. No promises. Bye-bye.